The night my husband told me I'd be nothing without him, we were standing in the kitchen of the penthouse I had quietly paid for. He didn't know that part yet. He just leaned against the marble counter, swirling his drink like he owned the world, and smiled at me in a way that made my chest feel tight instead of warm. "Let's be honest," he said calmly. "Everything you have is because of me." I didn't answer right away because 5 years earlier, I would have agreed. When Daniel and I met, he was the confident one, and I was the cautious one. He had energy, ambition, big ideas about building a logistics company that would change regional shipping forever. I had spreadsheets, savings, and a father who taught me never to sign anything without understanding it twice. Back then, it felt romantic how he needed my support and I needed his certainty. And when we got married a year later, everyone said we balanced each other perfectly. The company started small, just a rented office and 2 employees, and Daniel loved telling people how we built it together. What he never mentioned was that the startup capital came from my inheritance, or that the legal paperwork was handled by my family's lawyer, because he insisted young businesses fail when they cut corners. Daniel signed everything quickly, trusting me completely at the time, kissing my forehead afterward and saying, "I don't care about titles as long as we win together." I remember believing him because he used to hold my hand during meetings when he noticed I was nervous, and he'd tell clients I was the smartest person he knew. Success came faster than we expected, and with it came a shift I couldn't explain at first. He stopped introducing me as co-founder and started calling me my wife who helps sometimes. When interviews happened, I was suddenly busy at home. When celebrations happened, he stood center stage while I stood near the wall. I told myself it was just pressure, that leadership changes people. But every time he corrected me in front of staff or spoke over me during discussions, something small inside me folded inward. Our house changed too. The warm apartment became a polished penthouse filled with things Daniel chose alone, and conversations became brief, transactional. He started traveling more, claiming investors demanded constant attention, and when I asked simple questions about finances or decisions, he'd smile patiently and say, "Trust me, you wouldn't enjoy the details." I tried to laugh it off, yet I noticed how quickly he dismissed my input in meetings he once insisted I attend. The first time I felt truly invisible was at our anniversary dinner when his assistant joined unexpectedly because, according to him, she understands the business context better. She was young and confident, finishing his sentences while he watched her with quiet approval, and when I suggested a marketing change, he gently shook his head and explained it to me like I was learning a new language. I smiled through it, but on the drive home, he told me I was overthinking things and should focus on enjoying life instead of competing. Over the next months, he made similar comments often, always calm, always reasonable, but each one placed me a little further outside his world. He handled contracts alone, hired executives I never met, and gradually stopped including me in board updates, even though I technically still received the emails. Whenever I opened them, they were filled with language that felt intentionally complicated, and when I asked for clarification, he'd laugh softly and kiss my temple. "You worry too much. Relax. I've got this." I wanted to believe that was love, not control, until the night in the kitchen when his tone changed from reassuring to dismissive. He set his glass down harder than usual and looked at me like I was a child refusing bedtime. "You should be grateful," he continued. "Without me, you'd still be living off savings and hiding from risk. I built everything we have." I stared at him, remembering the documents signed in our first week, the conversations with my father's lawyer, and the clauses I'd insisted on because business and marriage should never blur completely. He mistook my silence for agreement and sighed, almost kindly. "You don't understand how hard it is to carry someone," he said, "but I do it because I love you." Something in my stomach sank because for the first time I realized he truly believed that story. And in that moment, I also realized he had no idea what he had actually signed. I went to bed that night pretending to be tired, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every meeting he'd excluded me from, every introduction he'd rewritten, and every decision he'd made assuming I was powerless. By morning, I knew two things with uncomfortable clarity. My husband didn't see me as a partner anymore, and very soon he was going to learn exactly who he'd been talking to all these years. The next week confirmed what my instincts had already whispered for months. Daniel began coming home later, always carrying the faint smell of expensive perfume that wasn't mine, and his phone never left his hand anymore. I didn't confront him because arguments with Daniel were strange, almost rehearsed, where he calmly reframed reality until I felt dramatic for noticing patterns. Instead, I watched quietly the way my father used to watch negotiations unfold, before speaking only when necessary. One evening, he left his laptop open while showering, something he never used to forget. A calendar notification blinked on the screen, marked private dinner, confirmed, scheduled on the same nights he claimed investor meetings. I sat there for a long minute, hearing water run down the hallway, feeling that familiar pull between denial and truth, and then I opened the attached email thread. It wasn't romantic language, not openly, but it was intimate in the way shared routines become intimate, discussing wine preferences, favorite tables, jokes about how she still thinks you're busy. I closed it before he returned and made tea with steady hands, surprising even myself. When he walked out wrapped in a towel, he kissed my cheek casually and asked about my day. And I realized I wasn't heartbroken in that instant. I was clear. Something inside me had shifted from trying to fix our marriage to understanding it had already changed without my permission. Over the next days, I visited the office quietly, not announcing my presence, just reviewing documents with the finance director, who still respected me enough to answer honestly. Numbers told stories people tried to hide, and the expansion Daniel proudly announced publicly was financed by risky loans he never mentioned at home. He had positioned himself as sole decision-maker, signing agreements that placed the company's stability in fragile balance, while presenting confidence outwardly. I thanked the director and went to see the one person Daniel rarely thought about anymore, Mr. Klein, the lawyer who handled our incorporation. He greeted me warmly and slid the original shareholder agreement across the desk without surprise, as if he'd been expecting me sooner or later. We read it together in silence, and hearing the percentages spoken aloud felt almost surreal after years of being treated like a guest in my own business. "Has he read this recently?" he asked gently. "I don't think he ever did properly," I admitted. The reality settled heavily but calmly. I didn't feel anger as much as sadness that our partnership had dissolved into performance. And yet I also felt a strange relief knowing the imbalance he created existed only in his perception. Mr. Klein explained the board meeting scheduled in 2 weeks regarding new debt approval, and the pieces aligned in my mind with unexpected clarity. That night, Daniel came home irritated after a call, pacing while complaining about board hesitation and how leadership required strength others lacked. I listened quietly until he noticed my silence and frowned. "You wouldn't understand these pressures," he said. "It's not your world." For the first time, I didn't correct him. Instead, I asked softly, "Are you happy?" He looked confused, then shrugged. "I'll be happier when everyone stops questioning me." I nodded and went to bed early again, but this time I wasn't staring at the ceiling in confusion. I was organizing documents, arranging meetings, and preparing something I never imagined I'd need inside a marriage. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was structural. He had removed me from my own company while risking it to maintain an image, and he trusted that I would stay silent because I always had. The night before the board meeting, he barely spoke to me, focused entirely on his presentation. As he packed his briefcase, he glanced over and said almost casually, "You should come tomorrow, actually. It'll help you appreciate what I deal with." I smiled gently. "I'll be there." He kissed my forehead, confident and distracted, not realizing I had been preparing for this meeting since the day he decided I didn't belong in it. And as I turned off the lights, I knew the next morning would change more than just our business. The boardroom was full when I arrived early, sunlight stretching across the polished table and city noise humming faintly below. I greeted directors I hadn't seen in months, some surprised, some relieved, and took a seat near the end instead of beside Daniel's chair. When he walked in 10 minutes later, mid-sentence on his phone, he froze for half a second seeing me there, then smiled as if I were a supportive guest. "Good," he said, setting his laptop down. "You'll finally see how this works." I nodded and let the meeting begin without interruption while he presented ambitious projections and pushed aggressively for approval of another loan. His confidence filled the room, but so did unease, and when the chairman asked about shareholder risk exposure, Daniel waved it off lightly. "The responsibility is mine," he said firmly. "I carry this company." The chairman looked at me briefly before turning back to him. "Not entirely," he replied carefully. Daniel laughed politely, assuming it was a joke, and continued speaking until Mr. Klein entered quietly and placed a folder in front of each member. The room shifted then, subtle but immediate, and Daniel's voice slowed as the chairman opened the document. "We need clarification before voting," he said, eyes steady, "regarding majority ownership." Daniel frowned slightly. "There's nothing unclear. I'm the acting head." "Acting head," the chairman repeated, "but not majority shareholder." Silence settled thickly as pages turned, and I watched realization approach him slowly. Disbelief first, then calculation. He looked at me, confusion sharpening into something closer to fear. "What is this?" he asked. I spoke calmly, my voice steady after years of staying quiet. "The original agreement you signed. My investment secured controlling interest from the beginning, 60%. His face drained of color as understanding landed fully, and the room felt smaller despite its size. "You didn't," he started, then stopped because the answer was obvious. "I never needed to." The chairman continued gently but firmly that major financial risk required my authorization, which had not been granted, and therefore the proposed debt expansion could not proceed. Daniel tried to recover, explaining leadership roles and operational authority, but the documents were clear and the board followed structure, not ego. For the first time since we met, he had no narrative to reshape reality around him. After the meeting ended, the directors left quietly, leaving just the two of us in the echoing room. He stared at me, searching for anger or triumph, but I only felt tired honesty. "You planned this," he said finally. "No," I replied softly. "I protected what we built before you decided it was only yours." He sat down slowly, the confidence I once admired replaced by stunned silence. I thought you needed me." "I did," I said, "when we were partners." We spoke longer than we had in months, not about business, but about the distance we both ignored. His apology came haltingly, real but late, tangled with excuses about pressure and expectation, yet the damage wasn't one moment, it was years of being rewritten out of my own life. Weeks later, we finalized both the company restructuring and our separation, quietly. He stepped down to an operational role he actually excelled at, and I took the leadership seat I never chased but always held the right to. The company stabilized quickly once decisions were shared again, and strangely, the tension between us faded into something respectful once the illusion disappeared. I moved into a smaller apartment by choice, peaceful and mine, and the penthouse no longer felt like a symbol of success, but of a chapter learned from. People often ask if revealing the truth felt like revenge, but it didn't. It felt like balance returning after being tilted too long. Sometimes I still remember that night in the kitchen when he said I'd be nothing without him. He wasn't trying to hurt me, he truly believed it, and that was the saddest part. Because love doesn't erase you quietly while smiling. Love stands beside you even when the world assumes only one of you matters. In the end, I didn't win because I owned more shares or proved him wrong. I won because I finally stopped agreeing with a story where I was smaller than I really was, and once I did, everything else naturally fell back into its proper place.